Well, welcome back to my Ford Transit Mk8 campervan build, and this is an episode I didn't think I'd have an opportunity to actually make. So, this is all about lithium. This is my AGM, my lead acid AGM battery bank, and they are about 190 amp hours of power, of which 95 amp hours of that power is actually usable. Here are 3 second-hand lithium batteries with a total capacity of around, or would have been when they were new, 390 amp hours, and weight for weight, I think all of these together it's probably about 5 kilos heavier than that battery bank, but near enough quadruple the usable power. So we're going to have a play with these. So these are Valence U27-12XP 130 amp hour lithium iron magnesium phosphate batteries, and this is what, in America, you see these pop up, or the newer models which are green, pop up quite a lot on the second-hand market. In the UK, you very rarely, this is a very rare battery for the UK, especially to come up on the second-hand market. So I jumped at the opportunity to go for them, and the only information which was on it was they came from a Ford Transit, and they had 7,400 miles on that clock, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Or I didn't think so, but I did the maths and I worked out that should be a cycle count of these for about 75, when their lifetime cycle count should be around 3,000. So, first off, these batteries need some repairs. These are the terminals which power will go to. These are communication cables, so the computer can talk to them. Since they're second hand, I want to get these plugged into the computer and learn about them, see what their cycle count is and their history and any errors of, which might be flagging up. However, like many of these second hand batteries, their communication cables have been damaged, where the connectors come off, or straight up the connectors have been cut off. So, first sign, they're looking good. They're all showing a charge of around 13.3, 13.29 volts, and they are flashing green LEDs. So every 20 seconds it's flashing, which means the battery is in good health, although the 20-second flash means it's currently in sleep mode. Exterior wise, these do look a bit of a state at the minute. Don't worry about it, this is just what seems to be expanding foam used to when these were used in a big battery bank to stop them shaking around. So they should clean up, no problem at all. And these numbers, I suspect it came from a vehicle, the electric vehicle came from had probably 22 or 24 of these running in a battery bank. So hopefully these are the module IDs for the computer. So first off, let's get these repaired, and we're going to reapply some Tyco or Super AMP Super Seal connectors and get these plugged in. As these are lithium batteries, which is a little bit more volatile when used incorrectly, I want to make sure that these are all going to be safe before I put them into my system. Right, first off, all these batteries are still covered in road dirt, so I'm going to get them all cleaned up, remove some of the old expanding foam and sealant which has been used to secure them in place. Right, well, less conveniently, on this one, the comms cables have been cut off, which doesn't affect the overall use of the battery, but I do want to get these working again so I can connect the computer to it and understand the history of the battery. It's not the end of the world, all I need to do is just strip off the wire and put a new set of connectors on. But these are quite short, so I'm probably going to extend them a little bit first and then add the and then build the plug back into it. So the cables inside these are pretty thin, so I'm just being pretty careful when going through the sheath at the minute not to nick any of the cables inside. Right, so this is the cable shielding, which I don't need. So these use RS485 serial. So what we've got is we've got a 5V positive as the red one, the common, the ground, which is the black, and then the white and green, or blue, can't see what it looks like in this camera, are data cables, or A plus and B minus. So if you will notice that these are 5-pin, while this is only 4 wires. It's because the 5th pin can be used for the shielding, as you'll see on there. Red for red, I haven't got any black, so I'm going to use black. Brown for black, green for green, and this sort of blue and white for the white one. So this is a slightly thicker gauge. I haven't got a smaller gauge, but that shouldn't really be important in this application. So I'm going to use my smallest little connectors to crimp these butt connectors on, and then apply the bigger wire to the other end. Just to point out, although these are exposed at the minute, nothing should happen if those touch each other, because they aren't being provided battery power. When you plug these into the computer or the battery management system, that gives them the power. Also, I believe, I should probably test that. Where's my voltmeter gone? So just to test that these are in fact not live. Nope. That's what I thought. Right. Although I don't see really any purpose of doing it, I am going to put a connector onto the shielding as well, and we can connect that up. So this would have all 5 wires then. Right, next job is you need to heat shrink all of these to finish and seal them up. So I'm just going to use a heat gun to finish off these heat shrink seals. Just as an extra little bit, because this is still a little bit loose at the top, I'm just going to cable tie the very top of it. Alright, this is one of the other batteries. This one has just had its connector pulled off, and I'm running out of these pin connectors, so what I'm going to have to do is probably recycle this, because I'm going to need to save the other ones for the other battery I need to do. So if I was doing this more often, or I was generally using these connectors, I would buy the correct crimp for them, as I don't have the correct crimp. So this is going to be a little bit of a ghetto crimping job. I think the way these, so what you normally do with these is you put the pin, one of these seals and the pin on the end of there, and then these clip into the holes in here. Cool, so we're just going to do much the same again with the cables we made. So that is all of them, all the communications cables repaired to the original forms. Next I need to build the communications cable, which is going to be one of these connectors to a USB. I did that last night though, so I'm going to roll that footage now. What I want to do is I want to build a communications cable. These are the actual terminals which are powering the 12-volt system in the van. These are communication cables, and these are using Tyco or AMP super seals, which is what I've got a set of here. This is what makes this model a little bit confusing. Everything says this is the Generation 1 battery. However, the Generation 1 battery uses a completely different pin layout, connector type, which looks a bit like this. Whilst the Generation 2 uses this, which is the connectors which this has on it. So I'm using the schematics here on how it works and which wire does what. And what I'm going to be connecting to is this. So these are going to be a RS485 cable, and this is an RS485 cable to USB. That's going to allow us to basically convert these wires into a format which I can plug directly into a computer. Obviously I can't plug this type into a computer. So I'm going to build that cable now, and then after that's built we can plug it into the computer hopefully. So I just bought this set of the super seals which come in all the way from the single pin all the way up to 6 pin. For this we need the 5 pin variation. However, I think only 4 of the pins we're actually going to use. Might not be the prettiest, but this should be the communication cable so the battery can speak to the computer. So it's about 24 hours since I made this communications cable, and for the life of me I could not get it to work. I tried, well, I googled a lot of the issues, and loads of people run into an issue where you get, when you hit the locate button in the software, it tells you there is no batteries found, although the battery was plugged into the communications cable. The diagnostic software is from 2012, so it's old, so getting it running on a modern computer isn't easy, so there is a network things to look at. A plus and B minus aren't in that location, they're actually reversed. So the second I reversed those on this cable, it worked first time. But let me get these cables plugged in so you can have a look and see what these batteries are like. So let's start the read. So I do know the history of this battery because I had to use one of the batteries to get the cables working. The other two I haven't looked at yet. So I originally guessed, because this was listed as battery bank from a Ford Transit which had 7,400 miles on the clock. I saw a YouTuber who was running these batteries in a bank of 24, and he was getting 100 miles per battery bank of charge for that battery bank. So I took that as a guess, so it's probably about 75 cycles. But let's have a look at the software close up. So number 18's got a good cell spread, only 9 or 10. No flags at all, and in the event log its cycle discharge amount is 82, which is good to hear. That was the one which had the cables completely cut off and I remade them. Let's have a look. Number 9, a little bit more of a cell spread, 14, 13, the limit's 10, well the alert limit's 10. And the event log shows 69 discharges for that. It's pretty good. Battery number 6. Yeah, a lot bit of a bigger cell spread at 37, 38 MV, so milliamps, I presume milliamps. But hopefully when we get it charged up, connected to the computer, the balance inactive state will change to balance active, and that's when the slave BMS inside the battery will start to make sure these cells are actually in line with each other and not far apart. And the cycle discharge amount of this is 80, which is what I'd expect. I'd expect, since they've all come out of the same vehicle from the same battery back, them to have a pretty close discount cycle. And we can also see all of them sitting in our little daisy chain together at the minute, so you can see all the modules. So I mentioned that these batteries have a bit of a story attached to them, and they do. So for starters, just getting hold of one of these in the UK is really rare. Valence didn't really sell them in the UK that much. You don't often see these come off in the second-hand market, and the fact that they're 10 years old, from my understanding, was quite an interesting one. So a bit of research online, and going off that bit of information I had, which said they were from a Ford Transit with 7,400 miles on, which didn't make much sense because Ford have only this year released a fully electric Transit in 2020. So these being the generation 1 of the battery, which makes it 10 years old, not sure where they came from. But some digging and some other YouTubers, I found that these batteries were originally from Sainsbury's, which is a large British supermarket. In 2010 bought or had a contract to get 50 brand new Ford Transits to be converted from new to electric for their inner city delivery fleet. What happened is that they were converted, that contract was completed in about mid-2010 from my understanding, and each vehicle had about 22 or 24 of these batteries running in its battery bank. And what happened is, not long after completion, it was found that the vehicles were near or over their gross curb weight, which is the maximum that those vehicles are allowed to weigh on the road, with very little payload, because one, these batteries are really heavy, and the drive chain system they used for moving the van was also very heavy. So they were quite quickly found to be basically illegal to drive, and it just seems the entire fleet of 50, with only about 7,000 miles on them, was mothballed and put in a storage yard. And from all the information I gather, they sat in that storage yard for years and years with nothing happening to them. And then years later, that the batteries or the vehicles were starting getting sold off, and it was finding that the batteries were still blinking away with their green lights saying they were in good health. So every so often in the UK, 22 to 24 of these come up for sale, or one of those vehicles, wherever they are nowadays, is parted out and those batteries are purchased. As you can see by the state when we got them, they haven't done anything else. They still had road dirt on them. They still had, some of them had been removed and cut up pretty quickly, as we saw some of the cables were cut off. But that's the origin of these batteries. They are old, and my guess of having around 75 cycles, because they'd done 7,400 miles, was pretty much bang on at 39, 80 and 82. So that's a little story attached to these batteries. Must have been a big contract to get wrong, since if they must have had to have about 1,200 of these batteries for that contract to be made, and then to find out that the vehicles were all overweight was probably a big issue. I think in 2010 these batteries may have retailed for about $2,000 each. I definitely paid a lot less for that, almost. So a lot of people are probably wondering, for the first part of this video, why are you trying to talk to batteries? Or I didn't know batteries could communicate. Generally, lead acid style batteries don't require anything to talk to them. They're just chemical reaction going on, and they're pretty happy with that. Inside it's one big battery. These sort of act as lots and lots of tiny batteries. So inside each one of these there are 18650 lithium cells, which is one of these cells alone powers one of my work torches. And inside each one of these black battery cases is 400 of these, running in 4 cells, presumably of 100 each. So when we had the diagnostic software up, there were cells which were all about in the mid 3 volts. Each one of those cells is 100 of these. So what the battery is doing is it's running those cells in series, which will then add all of those 3 and whatever volt 100 cells into the 12 volt, which is the battery. The imbalance, which we saw on number 6, was those cells at the minute aren't 100% identical charges to each other. Inside the battery there is a little computer called a BMS, or a battery management system. However, on this model it isn't really a true battery management system. The idea would be lithium batteries can hurt themselves if they're undervoltaged, which means you've discharged so much power out of them their volts drop below about 10.5. Overvoltage, so one of your chargers is putting too much power into them, so like 16 volts odd, and they can also be damaged if they are charged at 5 degrees or below. Some more expensive battery models, well, their built-in BMS will manage all of that for them, so if any of those damaging criteria happen, the battery itself won't allow itself to be damaged. These don't. The only thing the BMS does in these is manage the intercell balancing, and I think it only does that when it's above 13.4 volts, which is top end of it almost being fully charged, and it might only do that when it sees a computer is talking to it. At the moment, these green LEDs are flashing every 20 seconds, which means the battery's in sleep mode, which means its battery management system is off. When it was plugged into the computer sends a command which wakes them up, and that's when you can do all the readouts, and then you see it's a 5-second LED flash. That's also when, I think from my understanding, is the battery management system will be cell balancing if it's also being charged. So I need to manually build those safety precautions into my system before I use it, because not only can you damage the batteries, overcharging or undercharging, overvoltage and undervoltage, overvoltage and all the other bits that you can damage them can be also hazardous for the battery. Unlikely to get thermal runaway, as in a battery explodes, because this Valence use a lithium ion magnesium phosphate chemistry, which is apparently more stable than sort of LiPo batteries and other types, but generally I don't want to damage them. So on the next video we're going to be sort of looking into the process of how I'm going to add these into the van system to replace these ones and build all those safety mechanisms into the vehicle. I'm not going to plug them in at the minute. I mean, nothing's going to happen if I plug these into the system, they'll just work the same, there just won't be any safety criteria. So I'm going to be running these batteries in parallel on the van, which means all the positives are going to be linked together and all the negatives are going to be linked together, just the same as I've done with my lead acid batteries. However, I'm going to make sure these are all charged to the same charge level before I do that, because there's a very low resistance inside lithium batteries, is that the batteries are going to try and balance themselves, which is great. That's what I want normally when they're all charged, and that's what's also going to keep the cells and the batteries pretty aligned, is because they're going to be balancing each other because they're set up in parallel. However, since one of these is 13.2, the other one's a 13.3, I'm going to probably charge up one of them a little bit just so it's a little bit higher. What we don't want to happen is after you put the cables together, the battery with the least amount of power in it is going to pull as much as it can get from its neighbours to charge itself up. Because they've got very low resistance, they can pull a lot of amps, and potentially that could be too much for something in the battery or the wires between them. So I'm going to make sure they get charged up, but that'll be the next video when I actually bring them together. So the battery management system for these batteries is, from my understanding, they're sort of slave BMSs. Normally they would have a master which would connect all of these and do all the talking, and that master is one in charge of all the safety protocols, so disconnecting in high voltage, low temperature, high temperature scenarios. But that's when a lot of people would use that when they're running many of these batteries in large battery banks. I'm just using 3 in parallel, so they are going to be pretty good at stabilising each other. I'm just going to have to manually include those safety siege systems into my van's ladder system. That's pretty much going to end this video. So once again, thank you very much for subscribing. I'm glad I got to make this video. If you've got any questions, feel free to message me, and I will see you on the next time. Cheers, bye.